of the longest standing questions that humans have about God is, why would a good God allow suffering? It's sometimes put like this: if God is all good and all powerful, then he must stop all evil. But we see evil around us. So either God's not all good or he's not all powerful. And it's a very small step from there to say, perhaps there is no God. I've come to a different conclusion in my life. And one way that I look at it, which is helpful to me, and it is only one way, is that God introduces himself in the Bible frequently as our Father. I had good parents, not perfect, but good, and the suffering that I experienced as a child in different ways was not necessarily because they weren't perfect or because they weren't powerful enough to stop it. And this helps me to understand God. You see, there's ways that I experienced hardship or suffering which I think translate very well to our human experience. Sometimes it's a matter of us needing to learn and grow through something. The first time that I ran out of money when I was at college, my parents didn't instantly bail me out. They knew that I needed to learn the consequences of not budgeting, and they wouldn't have let me starve, but they let my phone credit run out and let me eat a few meals that were a bit too sparse, and as a result I grew and I learned, and I think that was a really valuable experience. I could have looked at it as suffering, of course. There were times when I was a child when they would discipline me, quite frequently in fact, in different ways, whether that was being sent to my room, whether that was having to make restitution for something I'd done wrong, or perhaps skipping a meal. There were times when they needed me to understand the consequences of my actions. And I think the same is true of God. I think sometimes he wants us to understand the consequences of what we do. Climate change perhaps might be seen as one very long-term consequence of selfish behaviour. But perhaps the hardest one to get our heads around is that sometimes we suffer because of the freedom that is given to other people. My parents and my teachers could have followed me around all the time, making sure that nobody was ever unkind to me and that I was never unkind to anybody else. We'd have had a pretty miserable life and we'd have been little more than robots, but they could have done it and it would have been mostly effective. But they didn't. They gave me freedom and they gave people around me freedom. And sometimes that freedom was used to play games and sometimes it was used to shove each other over in the playground. But the fact is that we were given that freedom, and God, I believe, gives us that same freedom and says you can use it to be kind and loving to each other, and I want you to, but you can also use it to be unkind. And because of that freedom that he gives to people, there are negative consequences for others. But the result is that we're not robots forced to do his will, but rather people who are free to do what we think is right. That's not a full explanation, and this is a very short video clip, but that gets me far enough to say I trust God for the rest.